it was just overthinking everything, every scenario. I've learned that I'm also autistic, so I've now understood that some of that anxiety was just not understanding social rules and norms.
What were those prayers like back then?
A lot of just crying out to God, going, I don't understand what's happening. I don't know why I feel this way. It's scary. I want to still be here, but then I've got all these thoughts telling me I shouldn't. And I'd gotten to the point of sort of having a rough plan of how I wanted to take my life. But in amongst that, still going, but God, like, please save me, because I don't think that's what I want. It felt very much like I didn't have control over my own mind.
So for the listeners, I'm here with Madeleine, or Maddy, Scholefield. She serves as managing editor of Anxious Faith, which is a publication of Our Daily Bread Ministries. Super excited for this conversation. I've been following Madeleine's work for a while now, a couple years now at least, and I've battled anxiety for as long as I can remember. And I've wrestled a lot with how my faith should be impacting my anxiety, and there's a lot of shame that can come with the question of, do I not have enough faith? Like, why has this not disappeared? And I think a lot of people battle that same thing. So much of what you do, I think, pushes back against some of those lies and against some of this shame that so many of us carry. And I think it enables people to actually heal and to actually invite God into that and to let go of the facade of the perfect Christian. So thank you so much for what it is that you do. And thank you for spending the time with me here today.
Yeah, thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm really excited.
Yes. So I would love to hear a little bit about your childhood. It's a very eclectic childhood, growing up amongst missionaries, traveling the world. It's kind of like a storybook childhood, but I'm sure it wasn't all rainbows and ponies. So I would love to hear a little bit about your parents and your upbringing, and then also a little bit of when you first had words to describe your anxiety.
Yeah, sure. No, as you said, I had a bit of an eclectic childhood. My parents joined the mission organization OM, which is Operation Mobilization, and they've got a bunch of ships. So we lived on a ship called the Doulos for across 10 years, really. And my parents joined when I was 1. So my, earliest upbringing was on this ship, and it was this really interesting, like, floating community of believers from all around the world. We had people represented from 52 different countries, and we lived full time on the ship. We ate meals together, and then we did missions work. So we would sail around to different third world countries, predominantly in Southeast Asia and Africa, and we would stay in a port for anywhere from a few days to a month, and we would send people ahead and go, what are the needs here? And then we'd go and try and meet them. And whether that was with events or training or, building schools and orphanages, or just sort of equipping the leaders that are already there. So that was, a really cool way to, I guess, experience the gospel in action and have that be just, part of everything that we did growing up. But as you said, not always easy. It definitely meant that those friendships and connections were always changing as a kid. Every time I looked out the porthole window on the ship, I was in a different country. There was a lot of sort of instability in terms of, like, I don't know what's coming next. But for the most part, really, really loved that kind of, that childhood. But I was an anxious kid. So I, from the time I can remember, was always being told, just to relax or to stop asking so many questions. And I was just always feeling quite uptight about things and sort of seeking control in a place where I couldn't really have control. So I don't know if I used the word anxiety until maybe I was a teenager, but really that's what I was feeling all along, that sort of tightness in my chest. Yeah.
When, because you're growing up amongst believers and at least living out a faith, whether you fully had it for yourself or not, but when did your faith become your own and you had a relationship one-on-one with the Lord?
Honestly, almost one of those Christian cliches, sort of like, I always had it. My parents would say from the time I was like 3, I was, they were helping me say the Lord's Prayer, and I was just like asking questions and praying to God every night, and just had that real like childlike faith, where that's just all I knew. And definitely when I was about 9 or 10, I was still on the ship, and that's probably when I was really starting to develop that faith for myself, though, those sort of that dialogue with God that wasn't just through my parents or things, where I was, going to him when I was scared or upset, or, asking him questions, and just really learning to rely on him, have that trust. But then, we moved back to Australia. There was a lot of culture shock. Suddenly we weren't living in this Christian bubble where everybody I knew was a Christian. And it was a lot more challenging to have that faith. So it definitely was tested over time, and I did go through a period of walking away for a bit and just going, I don't actually know if I would believe this if it wasn't just all I had ever known. So really just trying to test that for myself when I was sort of in my early 20s, really. Yeah.
What was that season like? Like, where did you go? I assume you were not on a boat anymore at this point.
No. So we moved back to Australia, and I had spent the rest of my teenage years in Australia. And then, I just had this I started university, and a lot of things were a bit unsettled, and I was just craving something different and feeling like I didn't want to be locked into this trajectory I was on. Law school, get married, get a job. Like, I wasn't ready for all of that. So I took we call it like a bit of a gap year exchange to Mexico, and I ended up living there for 10 months. But part of that time was the first time in my life that I hadn't been around Christian community, because, I could decide to go to church or not, but no one would know. My parents weren't there. My friends weren't there. There was that real lack of accountability. And so in many ways, I got over there and went, oh, okay, this is different. This is kind of fun. I was just so curious about, I don't know, living a lifestyle without God for a bit. And like, I don't know, people's testimonies had always made it seem so wild and fun. And I guess I just was like, am I missing something? Like, I've been a goody two-shoes little Christian girl all my life. I want to go to a party. I want to. So, I made some poor decisions. I tried that out for a bit. And honestly, it just left me feeling really, really empty, kind of broken. I felt ashamed and just a bit lost. And I saw that the people who were also living that way and partying every night around me also seemed lost, and they didn't have it figured out. And that's when I went, oh, okay, God, I think I do need you. And I know that now, like firsthand. And just came back to him and have been developing my faith ever since.
Yeah. So did you ever not believe in him? Or was it always, I believe that you're there, I just don't think I need you?
Yes, that's exactly what it was. So I've never doubted God's real. I've seen too much growing up to ever question that. I'm 100% convinced he's real. I just wasn't always sure that he was good. I had some things happen in my teenage years and in my family that made me think, well, maybe God isn't good, or maybe he's not always faithful. Yeah.
That's the case for so many people that I forget what the term is, but I think it's the Odyssey question of like, if these things are happening, then how can God possibly be good? And I think that finding the answer to that, whether it's a concrete answer or just a deeper faith, is crucial to living out your faith in this world, especially these days.
Yes.
It's not possible to just kind of think, oh, like, and I think even sometimes the lyrics we sing are a little oversimplified of, and I think God he never fails. Like, all these things are true, but I think sometimes even like the Christian worship scene and the way we talk about God in church, I think for so many people is sometimes so simple that it's like, I don't believe this anymore. They can't hold it because it just doesn't feel true,
Yeah. Or we don't make space for suffering and pain. And then when that does come into our lives, we go, oh my goodness, where's God? What's wrong? And I don't think the church in the West has done a very good job of preparing us for suffering, because nowhere in the Bible does it say that we won't experience that. It says that we will.
Ever.
So we
Yes,
should expect it. Yeah.
exactly. And lament is such a huge part of scripture. Like, I think of Psalms so often. Something that in seminary we talked about was how each psalm, it moves from lament to praise. So it's like there's lament, and that's a crucial part of it. And then it's this slow movement back towards praise. So you don't end in this
Yeah.
hopeless place.
Oh, yeah.
It's and even just like lament itself being a petition to God's character and being like, this horrible thing is happening, but I know that you are good. Like, where are you? That's a very healthy
Yeah.
question to ask.
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
God can take it. There's that crucial but in most of those Psalms. It's like all these things have gone wrong and I'm feeling this way, but I know that you're good.
Yes.
And that's what so much of our faith is, because we don't always feel it. We don't always feel,
Yes.
loved or all these things. But that's where we have to go to the Bible, because it's truth. And we go, well, I know that you are.
Exactly. Exactly. Wow. So those teen years, and I guess after you were all in the boat, were you in Perth?
I was born there. We moved around quite a bit. So I've ended up in New South Wales. Newcastle now.
Okay. That's awesome. I've only been to Sydney. I was there that same summer that I was in South Africa. I was in Sydney for like a couple of weeks. It was very interesting. I actually twisted my ankle on the Blue Mountain Trail.
No.
And like, and I was hiking solo, and I literally like was freaking out because I was like, I'm gonna die here. Like, what else is gonna, like, there's no one around. And I literally started praying. This sounds crazy. This is one of my favorite things God has ever done. I started praying, and the pain gone.
Really?
And I like heard the crunch. Like, there was a crunch, and I was in so much pain. And I cried and prayed, and literally the pain was gone. I like finished the hike. I was kind of like in shock. Like, I don't know what just happened. I get back to my hostel, the pain comes back.
Okay, wow.
Which I still don't really understand. But it's like, God, he got me back to my hostel, and then turns out like I twisted my ankle and like was in a little thingy for a bit. But anyway, God performed a miracle. And
well, that's amazing. But I'm sorry you had that experience in Australia.
Yeah.
It is a little dangerous.
Yeah, it was a little dangerous, but it's beautiful. It's so beautiful there. I've heard Perth has like the prettiest beaches in all of Australia. So
yeah, very white, like those classic postcard kind of white beaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So you were an anxious kid, you said. Did people use that term with you? Like, did you know there's a word for what I'm experiencing?
I'm trying to think. Not earlier on. My anxiety was framed a lot as me being a negative kid, which is interesting. My parents were often saying, stop being so negative. And I think that's because the expression of all that anxiety I was feeling as a kid came out as, well, this might go wrong and this might happen. And I was always, in their eyes, seeing the worst of things. But really, now that I understand anxiety, I was just trying to, figure out contingencies and go, well, I need to prepare. Just that sense of like, if I can't be in control, then at least I can think through all these scenarios. So it wasn't really talked about as anxiety until I was probably about 15 when it was getting really bad. And that's when it really, I guess, sort of that social anxiety strain came out. I was anxious in general, but definitely at school and high school, that started to be even more prominent. So Mum took me to a psychologist, and I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And I'm pretty sure there's another one, adjustment disorder, something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's when I was like, oh, okay, anxiety is a thing.
Mm-hmm. Did you sense a stigma then?
I don't think so, in the sense that I wasn't sort of telling people, oh, I'm diagnosed with this thing. I knew that it was harder to fit in when I was anxious and that people didn't always get it. But it was probably around that time I also then developed depression. And there was a lot more stigma for that, I felt, at the time.
Yeah. So how did these things manifest at that age? Was it because I think when people think of social anxiety, they think of like a certain type of person. And I mean, just looking at you, like you don't fit that, even just physically, you don't fit like what most people think of as like socially anxious, like I think people kind of think of like school shooter vibes. Like that's kind of the stereotype, is like a super awkward white, like skinny white guy. And that's just not how you,
I'm glad
like
I
you look
don't
like
fit
you would
that
have been
description.
popular in high school, you know?
No,
Like,
I was the weird
you know.
kid. um,
Okay.
well, thank you. No, it was quite crippling because it was just overthinking everything, every scenario. I've actually since I've learned that I'm also autistic. So I was diagnosed with autism
Mm,
a few years ago. So I've now
mm,
understood that some of that anxiety was sort of all mixed up in just not understanding social rules and
mm,
norms. Um,
mm,
but I was just overthinking a lot of things. It was simple decisions like being at the shops and going, do I get a red apple or a green apple? And just being frozen in those moments, like paralyzed in decisions,
mm,
and not being able to connect with people because I had this running commentary in my head the whole time, like, what are they thinking? How am I responding? What should my facial expression be right now?
mm.
So that was challenging. But then the depression on top of that, which came a bit later, was it was even more difficult.
Right. How did the depression usually manifest? Was it an energy thing, like a low energy, or?
Yeah, it really just it probably took me a while to notice that it wasn't just a low mood at the time, that it was this like prolonged period where um, I just lost interest in things. I was feeling just so checked out of school and friendships. I was just didn't really care. I
Mm,
wasn't wanting to spend time with my family or get outside. I put on a lot of weight. It was sort of in all these areas of my life. I just stopped caring, and I just felt really alone, and I felt like no one would understand it. And that was really
mm,
scary because then I started spiraling deeper, and those thoughts grew to, well, I'm not being a very good friend or a daughter or a sister. Maybe it would be better if I
mhm,
wasn't around. Um,
mm.
and yeah, that was a really dark place that I got to in that time.
Yeah.
Also involved self harm. I started thinking,
Mm,
well, I want to feel something. And I kind of, I guess, heard about it in movies or things in pop culture. And so I tried it, and I realized that, yeah, I liked it. And so, yeah, that was just a really confusing kind of
mm,
time figuring all
mhm,
that out.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy because I also like tried it out because of media, which now
Mm.
it's not that it's not funny, but it's a little funny when I think about it. Like I like tested it because I saw it in Degrassi, and then I was like, yeah, this actually doesn't do anything for me. So fortunately, the opposite, where I was like, this, all right, this just hurts. Like I'm not into this. But I think the media, it's kind of scary to me nowadays, like the way that the media addresses mental health issues. Like it can be great
Mm.
depending on how it's done, but I think that so often it's kind of glamorized,
Oh, yeah.
like the girl who's troubled, like that being kind of like sexy, like them making that into something that's
Yeah. And she's
aspirational.
helpless, and that's more attractive to
Yeah.
boys, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think they thought, yeah, I'm not even sure where it came from, but it's interesting you said Degrassi because we've interviewed someone on the Anxious Faith podcast, and they also said Degrassi
Ah,
was the thing they saw. So I've never watched it,
wow.
but maybe don't watch that when
Mm.
you're young. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe don't want. I was watching it way too young. Like I think I was hiding and watching it when I was like 11 or 12, which is incredibly young.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah, I tried out bulimia because of that, and that spiraled into a
Mm,
years long thing. Saw it on Degrassi, and it's just like no,
wow.
to be so careful. And again, it was that same kind of, oh, like she seems really cool, and wondering if that'll help you feel better about things, and of course it doesn't. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, craziness. So okay, so how did you kind of get out of that pit at this age? The depression is compounding. There's undiagnosed autism, which I really want to get into that also. How did you kind
um,
of climb out?
yeah. It was a period of close to 2 years where I was really at that rock bottom. There'd be periods where I would be feeling a little bit better and have a bit more energy, and I'd go, okay, maybe I'm through this, and then something would happen, or, you know, I'd just be sort of dragged back, it just felt like it was always over my shoulder, like ready to pull me down just when I felt like I was doing okay. So it was a really holistic approach. My parents were wonderful in just doing their best to support me the best way they knew how. I'm the eldest, so they'd never had to go through this with another child. And it was all very new for them. But as I had already said, like, my mum had taken me to a psychologist for anxiety. And so we were sort of seeing a professional in that way. Then just practically, you know, I wasn't wanting to go outside and exercise, and they would lovingly encourage / force me, you know, come on, Maddy, we used to love this, we're going to go for a run, or we're going to, you know, do kayaking or something fun, just trying to just help me remember those things that I enjoyed. It was encouraging me to go see friends. You know, I didn't feel like it, and I'd be in tears on the couch at home, and mum would be like, look, let's, you know, here's what you'll wear, I'm going to drive you, like, this is what you can say, and just sort of helping me, I guess, still participate in things. And I think over a prolonged period of time, coupled with I was praying to God a lot, I was, just really clinging to him, because I felt like that's all I had. I think all of those things grouped together, eventually there was no like one moment where I was like, oh, I'm better, I'm not depressed anymore. It was more of a slow creeping out, and then looking back and going, oh yeah, I used to feel really low all the time, and I don't anymore. It's been a while. So yeah.
Yeah. What were those prayers like back then, if you recall?
They were pretty desperate and just very, I've always been a words person. I've journaled a lot, so a lot of it was written down, which is cool to be able to sort of see what I was thinking at those times. But a lot of just crying out to God, going, I don't understand what's happening. I don't know why I feel this way. It's scary. I don't want to hurt myself. Like, I want to still be here, but then I've got all these thoughts telling me I shouldn't. And I'd gotten to the point of sort of having a rough plan of how I wanted to take my life. But in amongst that, still going, but God, like, please save me, because I don't think that's what I want. It felt very much like I didn't have control over my own mind, and that I was almost trapped in it. So going to God was going, God, nobody else understands what's happening. I don't get it, but I have to trust that you do. The Bible says that you know my thoughts from afar. Which is really comforting, because I have no idea what's going on in my thoughts right now. So, it was a very lonely sort of time. And God, I felt a lot of comfort in knowing God knew what I was going through, and I trusted that he was going to get me through it.
Yeah. And he did, praise God.
Yeah.
When you look back, it's a tough conundrum, because I think that often Christians can over spiritualize what is chemical. But then I also think that in the world we under spiritualize, and we don't recognize the spiritual component of so much of what we experience. When you look back, how much of that, you know, I had these thoughts that I didn't understand and they felt uncontrollable. How many, or I guess, how would you describe spiritually what you were experiencing? Do you think that those thoughts were demonic? Do you think there was demonic influence at play?
Yeah, that's so interesting, because we do tend to kind of swing one way or the other. There are those extremes where people don't acknowledge that the spiritual realm is real, and that we are under attack. We do face an enemy, but at the same time, not everything is an attack. I think the way I've come to understand it now is that many of us, we can have a predisposition to depression and anxiety and these things. There's a reason why they're often genetic and seen in families. But there are so many other sort of situational causes as well, and trauma and other things that impact it. So it's hard to say why. But I definitely believe that the enemy can use what's already happening to, I guess, to steer you away from God, or to try and, take advantage of you when you're in that weak state. So I wouldn't say that, like, the enemy caused my depression or anything. But I can definitely see how he would have loved that I didn't have energy for going to church, or, you know, he would have really, I guess, tried to pull me away from God, and those lies that were in my head a lot about my worth, or about that things would be better off without me. Yeah, they might have been from him. And at the end of the day, to me, it doesn't really matter whether it was a spiritual attack or a chemical imbalance, because my response should be the same, like to just cling to God. And it's actually really interesting that in the last month, I have been feeling quite depressed, actually. And I haven't said that to anyone recently, but I'm on medication that one of the side effects is that. So, and that's just a short-term medication I have to be on at the moment. And it's reminded me what it used to feel like when there was no actual reason to feel that low, when you just waking up feeling like there's no point, and questioning everything. And it's a really scary place to be in, but in some ways it's comforting, going, but that's not me. That is literally just imbalances in my brain. So don't know if that answers that, but I think it could be both.
It does. I'm sorry you're experiencing that again. It's a difficult thing. But I mean, I'm glad that obviously you're in a very different place than you were before. It's a very different thing, but
only
still not a fun experience. Yes. Amen. Yes. Yeah. No, I can absolutely relate. Actually, I've been grieving the loss of my cat that I had for 19 years. And I did not expect it to hit me this hard, but it's been like, I mean, the worst mental health season of my adulthood. And I'm like, God, like, why is this hitting me? So yeah, thank you. It's been a lot. And I think it's just kind of unearthed stuff that I didn't recognize, or I didn't slow down enough to recognize, like, oh, I'm battling things mentally. And I don't think I really slowed down to acknowledge that. And so this has pulled it all out, and it's made it so that I can't ignore it, which ultimately I think is a good thing. Like, there's a lot of healing that's happening now, but it's tough when, as a Christian, when you feel like I'm growing, and it's not that you're not growing, but I think, again, because of the way that Christians tend to think about mental health and tend to think about sanctification, I think I thought I'm on this upward trajectory.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, wait a second, I'm not okay. And I've had to really be like, it's okay that I'm not okay. Like, it's fine that I'm not okay. Yeah. The good news is that I'm grieving with God, and that I'm turning to God. And like, I have the assurance that I will survive this. Like, so thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry you're going through that. Like, 19 years is a really long time.
It is. It's a long time. It's like that catch-22, right? Because it's like, he lived for 19 years. I should just be grateful. Or that's what I think to myself. Like, I should be grateful. But it's like, that's 19 years of attachment also.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so attached to this cat.
Definitely.
But we will survive. We will survive. Yeah. So, autism. I know autism tends to present differently in women. So it's not uncommon for women to be diagnosed later in life, which is sad. And it's difficult that so many people probably don't understand, like, why do I not fit in? Why do I not understand in the way that other people understand? Yeah. What are the misconceptions around autism that you see, and what's the actual reality of that for you?
Big question. Yeah. I think there are a lot of misconceptions, thanks to the media again, that autistic people, it feels like there are these extremes. You're either this genius who's a genius in science and maths, because apparently those are the only things you can be a genius in, or you're the kid with no friends, or maybe you're nonverbal, and it really seems like those are the sort of two accepted forms of autism. And then there are like thousands or hundreds of thousands, I don't know the numbers, of people just in the middle, just normal people that have a brain that's wired differently, that experience sensory input differently, and processing information. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is so many people after I got diagnosed going, well, how can you be autistic? Because you can make eye contact, and you can talk, and you can connect with people, and a lot of that is masking that concept of From the time we're really young, we are taught how to behave, and for better or for worse. Like, I'm glad my parents were really kind of encouraging, like, hey, don't walk on your toes or flap your hands around in public, or, this is how we talk, this is how we use intonation in our voice, and we make eye contact when we speak to people. So things like that really then make you fly under the radar because you're not fitting that stereotypical description.
Right.
But yeah, for me, so autism is diagnosed in three sort of main areas. One is like sensory differences, and that's a huge one for me, just different sounds and input that other people might ignore or not respond to in the same way. For my brain, it can't really filter it out. So like background noise in a cafe is playing at the same volume as the person speaking to me, and it just makes it difficult to engage in the outside world in that way. And the second one is repetitive behaviors, or restrictive and repetitive, and so that's a lot of those intense, like, special interests, they call them, or stimming and other things, and just these different areas of difference, I guess. Sorry, I got a little lost there.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
So like stimming, I think when I hear that, I think of like tapping and things like that. Is it that sort of thing, like physical, like self-soothing type of motions?
Yeah. Self-stimulation is the, so stimming is things that you need to, I guess, almost like ground yourself in a space. For me, like if I'm comfortable and I'm at home, that's like flapping my hands or pacing, or there are things like echolalia, which is when you use your voice, your vocal cords to do that. So it's like humming or making sounds that a lot of people do. So yeah, rocking back and forth, spinning. There are, and everyone stims to an extent, like when you're clicking a pen, or people are nervously fiddling with something. A lot of us do need that sort of tactile stimulation to calm ourselves, but for autistic people, that's usually a bit more pronounced.
Okay, got it. What was it like to be diagnosed? Was it a relief to be like, oh, here's why, or were you kind of struggling with that diagnosis?
It was a huge relief. It was very freeing, because I grew up always feeling different and having that real sense that something's not quite right. And it wasn't till I got into my teenage years that I had more of the words to express that. But we go through the world almost expecting that everyone's experiencing things the same way we are. And it's not until someone else shares something and you go, oh, I've never thought about it like that, or that's not at all what I experience. So that was sort of in the teenage years where I went, oh wait, do other people not have to think through all these things just to have a conversation? Or that's where I started to know, or like, do other people not fake laugh at jokes because they don't get them? Or, and yeah, so by the time I was 22 when I got diagnosed, my parents had moved overseas. I was living alone for the first time, and without that sort of safety net there, that's when a lot of the things that had been, I guess, being covered up by just living with family were exposed. I was like not just good at feeding myself and knowing when to eat, and like paying attention to those signals in my body, and really just struggling to keep routine and all these things. So by the time I got diagnosed, it was such a relief, because I went, oh, okay, I'm not like, I'm normal as an autistic person. There's not something wrong with me in a sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you encountered any of those people? Because unfortunately, this exists in the church they're like the conspiracy theory types, of course, who have their own theories of where autism comes from. But then there also are people who, with any difference, whether it's a disability or neurodivergence or anything, kind of have this God will heal you mentality. Have you ever come across that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's such an interesting thing, because I'm aware that every autistic person and anyone with a disability is different. Like, there's no just lump category. So for
Yeah.
me, I feel like I am autistic. That is part of my identity. I can't separate it from who I am. And so the idea of needing to be healed from it is, well, this is me. I don't know who I am without it. And it's just the way I see the world. So I don't want to be healed. I don't think I need to be healed. But then I also see the people who long for healing, who just, it is also a struggle, and it is hard living life in a world that's, you're the minority. You're not, things aren't set up for the way your brain works. And I hear those people who absolutely say, yeah, I want to be healed in heaven. I can't wait to not be autistic. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting conversation to think what will heaven look like one day? What does healing look like here on earth, but then also in eternity? I'm not sure of the answers. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a curious thing because it's easy to imagine if you have lost a limb that this limb will be restored to you in the next life. But if it's something in your mind that is in many ways who you are, like even with, I have attention issues and I even think about how my brain operates and it does feel like part of my personality. Like I wish I could focus more. I wish I didn't have executive functioning issues. I can imagine being healed of those, but I can't imagine being healed of my personality. So it's like, who would you be in some ways if you were not autistic? Like you'd be a different Madeleine, right?
Yeah, it's the whole lens that I see the world through and how I process information. It's everything. So,
yeah. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
I did a bad job of explaining. I got like 2/3 of the way through what the different like autistic traits
that
are diagnosable. When I looked them up, my mind went blank.
I think you said 2 out of 3, right?
I did. I got one of them wrong.
What is it?
Well, there are the 3 traits of autism that are diagnosable. One is social communication differences, which is, in terms of like interacting with other people. The second one is sensory differences. And the third one is restricted and repetitive interests and behaviors. So,
okay.
Those are sort of
Right. Kind of like, because I actually dated a guy who has Asperger's a while ago. And it's like the fixation, right? Like he was fixated on sports journalism, which he didn't tell me until I think our 4th date that he was on the spectrum. He was like, I didn't want you to not like me because of that. Aww. And it made sense once he told me, but like the fixation went over my head because I'm also interested in journalism. So I was like, this is fine.
You're like, awesome.
That's kind of, like this doesn't bother me at all. But
it's funny. There are very acceptable like special interests, and then others that are weird. There are the stereotypes of like a guy who likes trains a lot, like that's autistic. Yeah. But then, I can have a really intense interest in like one particular crafting hobby, and everyone's like, that's awesome, you go.
That's so cool. Yeah. Right. Which is also interesting, like the gender differences and how people are read. Like I wonder why it is that for so much of your life no one was like, are you on the spectrum? Like I wonder why it is that it's just read as, she's quirky.
Well, yeah, I think that a big one is that just societally we raise girls to be much more social, and we just expect more of them in a way, the manners and just being able to be polite. And girls just spend so much more time talking, like their play is all just imaginative talking, whereas I think boys can just get away with, I don't know, running around the backyard or like being much more physical and like so girls almost get taught how to mask like from when they're really young. Yeah.
Right. And masking is basically presenting as neurotypical, like covering up your neurodivergence, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not even something that you always notice you're doing. I didn't even know the term till I was 22. And so the idea of, you get a lot of people in the autism community talking about learning to unmask. But that's really hard to do. And it's like all these learned patterns and behaviors of sort of being a bit more palatable to neurotypical society. And then suddenly you're being told, no, we should be ourselves and we should not make eye contact if that doesn't come naturally. And it's like, well, I've already learned how to do that. So it's, separating what's me, what I've learned. It's really challenging.
It's interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about your work. I stalked your LinkedIn as you do before an interview, and I saw that you kind of veered away from law. You were pursuing law at one point, and then you veered away from that
Mm,
towards your actual passion, which is writing. And we were the same in
yeah.
that respect. I did the exact same
Oh,
thing. I
wow.
realized I loved writing so much while working as a paralegal. I was like, wait, what am I doing? Like,
Wow.
I don't care. Like, I
Yeah.
don't enjoy this work. And
Mm,
it was while I was a paralegal that I started then got moved and started to take it seriously and ended up going to seminary. And I'm so
wow.
grateful, and that feels like such a God thing that he intervened and was like, you're going down this path just because that's what the world's telling you to do, but I actually have this in some ways more difficult, like more blurry path for
Mm.
you that is a purpose path. So what was your journey professionally of discerning, actually my vocation is not law?
Yeah. Similar in sort of, the world tells you if you get good grades. Here in Australia, there's like a ranking system. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in the States to get into university or college.
Mm.
And I scored very highly. And it was almost like, well, that would be a waste if you didn't do medicine or law. Like, you got
Yeah.
in, so why would you not? And
Mm-hmm.
being the eldest in my family, carrying, a bit of that sort of like eldest child responsibility and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are, big on going to university, and I'm glad they pushed me. But yeah, I was interested in law. I thought that sounds cool and it involves a lot of reading and writing in a way. Um,
Mm.
and so, yeah, I did 3 years of it, and it took me that long
Wow.
to admit to myself and just to kind of be certain enough to then say to my parents, actually, I just want to be a writer. And
Mm.
that's all I've ever wanted. But
Mm-hmm.
you kind of get the world's ideas put on you of, oh, well, that's unrealistic and that's not very
Yeah.
smart and that's not going to earn you money, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
not a smart option. So I'd kind of given up, like that's just a side hobby. And then
Mm.
it took me those 3 years to go, well, actually, it is my life, and maybe I can take that risk and be thankful for university and those opportunities, but also go, well, I don't have to go down that path.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, my parents weren't stoked about it at the start, but now they're really proud of me, and
Yeah.
I just had to do that. Had to disappoint them for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's awesome because it's very similar where I was like, I just want to write. Like when I was a child, I was like writing
Mm,
short stories and I knew that that's what my passion was. And then
yeah.
fortunately, there was, because I initially was actually like, I'm going to be a doctor, which was really just a
Ooh.
love of money situation. Like it was literally just like,
Okay.
oh, I should do this. Like I should be a doctor. Like I used to have to give my cat like a water treatment with a needle and I would pray every time because I was on the verge of passing out every single time. So I don't know
Okay, so
why I
maybe not
thought,
the career for you.
yeah, not at all. But I was just like, oh, I should be a doctor. And my advisor in college, I remember, was like, you love, because fortunately it was a liberal arts school, so I had to take humanities classes. And she was like, you love
Okay.
these. Like, pursue this. And I was like, I can't. I have to make money. I can't make money pursuing writing, pursuing academia. And she was like, you can though. And because
Mm.
of her, I changed my major. So forever
Oh,
grateful, forever
yeah.
grateful to the Lord also just for redirecting. Because doctor, lawyer, it looks good on paper, but if your heart is not in it, and I think that is the case for a lot of people who are very successful in traditional fields who, they know deep down on some level that they're not living out their purpose, and it's a tough thing.
Yeah. And it's not
So
that it'll always be easy, or like I don't really buy into if you're doing what you love, then it'll never feel like
yeah,
work. Like I think
no,
work is work and we have to work hard, and it's not always
yeah,
pretty or easy. I have a really cool job, but a lot of the times I also don't like it. And I'm,
mm,
so blessed to have it, but it doesn't mean that it's not hard.
yeah,
But it's,
yeah,
yeah, definitely finding what your passion is helps.
absolutely, absolutely. So what is the story of anxious faith, and what is the mission as well?
Yeah. So Anxious Faith began in 2021 as just a uh, 5 part episode uh, thing where someone on our Australian team, James Burke, here in like our Daily Bread Ministries,
Mm-hmm.
we were noticing that mental health is a huge problem for Christians, and especially in Australia as well. We were seeing those numbers, or he was, and he decided to run this podcast. And then I was actually a guest on that podcast the very first time. So I wasn't working at the ministry at the time. I just had a little blog and I'd written about my anxiety, and someone had found me and gone, hey, can you jump on? So that's how I got involved. And then after that first 5-part series, it got extended and just became this whole ministry sub-branch of Our Daily Bread Ministries, where the heart really is to kind of break down the taboos and the stigma around mental illness in the church, and really show other believers that you can struggle with those things and still have a faith, that it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're not a good enough Christian. And moving into next year, we're actually going to be expanding that a little. So it's not just going to be focused on mental illness. We're going to be looking at like well-being of believers as a whole, and like really holistically, what does it look like to be a Christian today, mind, body, spirit, and what are the things we struggle with, and what does the Bible say in those moments, those everyday moments that make up our lives.
So cool. That's cool, the expansion. That's really cool to know also. Like, that's something I think about a lot, is what does it mean to treat your body as a temple? What does that actually look like? And thinking of even things like eating disorders, not in a condemning way, but thinking of it as a sin issue, I actually think is freeing in some ways. At least it has been for me. Like, when those thoughts from childhood come up and those temptations to do whatever it is that I used to do for control, thinking of that as a sin against my own body is powerful. It's like, what has God actually commanded us in terms of our bodies? What does it mean to nourish your body as worship? Like, I think that's also a very powerful thought of, like, your body is not your own. You can't just eat what you want and do what you want, but that it exists for God's glory. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, definitely.
That's really cool.
Because we are created like these multidimensional beings, and to treat things as only spiritual or only physical, like, I feel like you miss out on so much. So we're going to be exploring things like burnout and grief and community, like friendships. How do we do those? How do we do relationships well? Loneliness and those sorts of things.
Yeah. What do you usually share as advice, I guess, for those who are struggling themselves or who have friends who are struggling, whether it's anxiety or depression or a different sort of mental illness? What is your kind of word of encouragement?
Oh, there's so much you could say. Obviously, it's really important to talk about it. People can't support you if they don't know what you're going through. And I just took so much comfort in knowing that God knew what I was going through. When it does feel isolating, He knows. There was a verse in Romans 8:26 that talks about how the Spirit helps us in our weakness. So we do not know what we should pray for, but the Spirit intercedes for us through wordless groans, it says. And I just loved that because so much of when I was struggling with anxiety and depression, I didn't know what to pray for, and I wanted to get it right. I'm like, what am I supposed to be asking God for? And just finding peace in knowing that, like, the Spirit is within us and is communicating to God on our behalf. So even when we don't have the words, we can still just sit with God in His presence. And that was really powerful for me when I didn't have the words. I'd encourage people just to sit with God. You don't have to know what to say. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. Just that vulnerability and honesty. Yeah.
Yeah, He can take it. He can take your brutal honesty.
Yeah, He can. He definitely can. I think about a lot Jacob wrestling with God, and how I think in our Christian culture, especially Western Christian culture, it's the performance anxiety, I guess. It's this feeling of wanting to present your best to God. And like, where are we getting this? This is not the Christian tradition or the scriptural tradition. Like, there's this totally space made, and also a case made biblically, for wrestling with God, for really truly like tossing with Him and being messy. I think He loves that.
Oh yeah. And these like biblical heroes that we put up on a pedestal and we think, wow, they were just such incredible people of faith. They had so many flaws, like, David and Paul himself. I was looking at Moses yesterday and remembering that when he first got called by God from the burning bush to go and talk to Pharaoh, he said, like, he argued back at least 3 times.
Yeah.
Like, God would say, do it. And he's like, no, but like, I'm not that good at speaking. And God's like, no, still do it. And he would just fight back. And he had that wrestle with God. And that wasn't just the first time, like, it happened again. So if, you know, if those people who are in the Bible for eternity as like great heroes of the faith can struggle and wrestle and bring that to God and be like, no, then why can't we, you know?
Exactly. Well said. Thank you so much. This has been comforting to me personally, and I'm grateful again for your vulnerability. I know it's not, I mean, I'm sure you're used to talking about these things at this point. It's your job to write and talk about these things, but still, thank you for being vulnerable with me and my audience and being willing to make an example out of your own suffering and the peaks and valleys. Because you could have just written about anything else. You could have made a career writing about something totally different and kind of kept that for yourself, but you haven't. And it's powerful.
No, thank you. No, I just think it's so cool to get to share with other people, and thanks for being vulnerable about your own story and what you're doing. This is so powerful. So
for sure. Thank you. Quickly, I know you're married. I would love to hear this story and also what role, if any, anxiety played in discerning marriage and getting married.
Yeah. I met my husband, Matt, 6 years ago now. He was just sitting behind me in church, and my church did that awkward, like, turn around and say hi to someone new. And I hate that.
Wow.
But we met. We were just around each other at church for a whole year until we started dating. And it honestly just felt right from the beginning, which was interesting because anxiety had always played a massive part in my relationships. I had several relationships before Matt, and with each of them, there was this crippling doubt of like, is it right? Is it not? How will I know? And I was so convinced that when married people would say, oh, when you know, you know, like, I hated hearing that. I just thought, well, what if that's not true for me? Because I'm dating this person and I don't know. And is that my anxiety? Is that just because I'm like, am I always going to be questioning it? Will I ever be sure? And I'd pray so much about it. I'd be like, God, give me an answer. Should I break up with them or not? And honestly, I was frustrated because God would never just be like, yes or no. Like, he kind of let me wrestle and figure that out. But then when I started dating my husband, it was this complete peace, which is weird for me. And yeah, there was just that very quickly, that reassurance that I was like, this feels right in my spirit. I'm not doubting and questioning. And truthfully, when you know, you know. And now, then I knew. So yeah, we've been married 3.5 years and together 5. He's the best. So very thankful for that.
That's sweet. That's sweet. I love that it started with something that literally made you anxious. Like that it started with a situation where you're like, no, please don't make us turn around and say hi.
Yeah. Yep. It's ironic.
Yeah, that's sweet. Well, thank you so much for your time and for everything that it is you do. As I said, I love your ministry, and I would encourage listeners to go check out Anxious Faith. The handle is Anxious Faith on Instagram.
Yeah, we're on TikTok and Facebook and YouTube, LinkedIn, if anyone wants to go there.